The people who become supporters of St. Jude Children's Research Hospital each walk a different path. They might know a patient. They might have been a patient. They might make a monthly donation without any fanfare. They might rally everyone they know to their side. They run marathons, organize auctions, call into radio shows. Some tap into their artistic talent, create something new that finds a deeper, longer-lasting purpose. I'm Geoffrey Redick with St. Jude Inspire, and I'm going to tell you now about one of those supporters. Over the summer, I took a long road trip out west. I was alone, and I was driving through wide open landscapes. It was desolate sometimes. The aftermath of wildfires, hillsides covered with burned trees that were charred black and their limbs curled down toward the ground. I could see smoke far in the distance. From the road, it looked like there was nothing alive. The only moving things were the other cars on the highway. It was lonely. But I had good music to distract me, and I just drove on. If I were Kenneth Vigue, I might have focused in on what I was seeing. I might have imagined a character walking through those burned-up trees, looking for food and shelter, trying to figure out how to survive. I might have built a story from that desolation.
I had a sandbox of a beautifully realized world, but no narrative that I was being spoon-fed, so one started to kind of percolate in my mind.
That's Ken, and he's talking about the video game Fallout. There have been a lot of versions of Fallout, and they're all set far in the future, after what the game calls the Great War and global nuclear annihilation. It's just a few survivors living in vaults. Ken started playing with Fallout 3.
In my teenage years into my 20s, I was heavily into urban exploration and photography. So these kind of melancholy, entropy-laden landscapes where just everything has broken down and it's ruined buildings, but there's a strange beauty in that desolation. That wasteland landscape really drew me in.
So the version that Ken's talking about, the sandbox without a narrative, that's Fallout 76. It came out in 2018, and it was different. The earlier versions were role-playing games. You turn on your console, and you kind of play the plot with some choices, sort of like a choose-your-own-adventure book. Fallout 76 was different in two ways. First, it was online, and it was multiplayer. You weren't just playing the plot, you were playing with other people who could be anywhere in the world. Ken had never played that kind of game before.
And it ended up being what has been the best gaming experience in now decades of gaming that I've ever had.
But like he said earlier, there was no narrative. So he created one.
And I envisioned two characters, Simon and Chad, who grow up in a vault together. And in a very high school-esque way, you have Chad, who's a typical jock type, and Simon, who's forever just a miserable, sad sack, glass half empty kind of human being.
Ken started writing journal entries as the character Simon. He put them online, and it turned out that a lot of other people wanted a narrative for Fallout 76 too, and they liked the story that Ken was telling. It was funny and relatable. Fast forward a couple of years, and that story is now a podcast called Chad, a Fallout 76 story.
After I returned to my camp, I discovered a stranger had made himself comfortable at my home. He was just sitting in one of my chairs, just staring off into space. After a moment's confusion, my stomach dropped. It was Chad. Chad from the vault. We had a brief and very awkward chinwag recalling good times at 76. Without even asking, he started cooking up chems at my bench, and then had the audacity to ask me for some purified water and dog food. Despite our history, I recalled the words of the overseer I listened to as I stepped out into the light for the first time. I had to be neighborly. I begrudgingly shared what meager resources I had, and he went on his way.
In season 1, you're meant to hate Chad. He's every school bully you ever knew. But over time, you find out that Simon is a very, very unreliable narrator. And people find themselves very slowly and intentionally liking Chad more and more.
The podcast now has dozens of episodes and hundreds of thousands of listeners. So these fans of a post-apocalyptic video game have found a community around this podcast. And that community extends into real life because now it's working to fight childhood cancer by supporting an annual online fundraising campaign for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Ken recruited his community through a program called St. Jude Play Live. It helps gamers connect with audiences so they can play for more than bragging rights. And Ken's campaign is called Fallout for Hope. Let's back up a little bit to 2018. That's when Fallout 76 came out, and Ken started playing it right away. He thought up the characters Simon and Chad pretty quickly, and when the journal entries about them went viral, people wanted Ken to turn them into a web series or a comic book. But he wanted to make a podcast, and the reason for that goes back even farther.
When I was a kid, my grandmother used to take me to this giant Federalist mansion that I converted into the city library. My grandmother would go into the reading room and flip through magazines and newspapers, and I would go into the children's room. Then the upstairs was almost opera theater-like. It was all beautifully varnished wood, a classic library. You could take spiral staircases up. So I went to the very tippy top, and in the far corner was just floor-to-ceiling vinyl records. So I started flipping through and found this black and white cover that had a huge skull in the front of it. And it said Lights Out, Murder Castle.
Lights Out was a radio show in the 1930s and 40s, the golden age of radio drama. A lot of the Lights Out stories were totally made up. Some were based on real life. Scary stories to listen to in the dark.
It was an amazing radio play. A lot of the sound of that I try and bring into modern podcasting in terms of the sounds that we create and the stories that we tell.
So the first episode of Chad, a Fallout 76 story, came out in May of 2019. And Ken wasn't sure that it would go anywhere. There was that viral buzz for the journal entries he'd written. But honestly, he'd kind of taken his dreams of being a writer and put them away on the shelf.
I mean, I hadn't written anything creatively in over a decade. You get caught up in life and career and all of these things. And writing wasn't really going anywhere for me. And you can only deal with so many rejection letters before you're like, all right, I think it's time to put this stuff away. So I was both cautiously optimistic and also just I had very little expectation that this was going to go anywhere.
But that first episode got a big response, and he decided to keep going.
I thought that people would get tired of my voice in the same way that I already was. And moreover, I wanted to be able to tell bigger, more dynamic stories, and I could only do that with a full cast. So I decided to change the narrative structure of the show and make it a proper full-scale radio drama with a full ensemble cast. So episode 4 is almost a soft reboot of the show.
Hey, what's a buzzin', cousin?
Oh, another customer, Ella.
Let's go get him!
How goes it, little bit?
Hi there. Would you like some fresh squeezed lemonade?
Is it made with real lemons?
I don't know. Why don't you take a sip and see for yourself?
Nah, I'm not a fan of the tart stuff.
Some of the voice actors in some of the episodes are also people who work at Bethesda Game Studios, the company that has the rights to Fallout.
Yeah, which is still very surreal and wild. I got an email out of the blue, and I could see that it was from Bethesda Game Studios. And I thought, well, it was good while it lasted. Here comes the cease and desist. And it wasn't. It was a what if scenario to see if there was a possibility of creating a live stage show. It was, to my great surprise, that many of the developers of the game had stumbled on the podcast and started listening to it and really enjoyed it. I had to think of a story that would make sense on a stage. I used to do quite a lot of playwriting, so I just wrote it as a courtroom drama setting, essentially where Chad and Simon are put on trial for all of the awful things that they did the first season of the show. And they wanted to see if there was a way that we could work in the global vice president of marketing for Bethesda, Pete Hines, into the show. And I thought, boy, he would make an amazing judge character. He was really open to the idea of to keep reprising the character, which has been a lot of fun writing for him. And over time, some of the other developers, there was some opportunity to create characters for them.
Do you still write all of the episodes, everything in it?
I write almost all of the episodes. I think fans would like to get more episodes more quickly. But because of the production quality of the show, it takes us a while to do them. So the main episodes I write, and then the minisodes, there are a few writers who pen some of those minisodes, and also some of the cast themselves write their own minisodes. And they're sort of bite-sized, 15 to 20 minute mini adventures that are more character focused. So it's their opportunity outside of our main episodes to get up to some silliness.
How do you keep everything straight at this point?
When I thought of what the show is going to be, I had a plan in my head for a 4-season arc. And right now we're a little over halfway through our second season, and we're building up to a major shift in the show. The season finale this year is going to be a turning point where there's going to be a massive battle for Appalachia. Everything that's been built up over the past few seasons, every character that they've met, the dark secret that they've been trying to uncover, in terms of why is it that they can't die? They just spontaneously renew. There's something behind that, and they've been trying to figure out what it was. What makes the show interesting is I try to take the player meta experience of the game and then write it as if the characters were experiencing that themselves. So when we die in the game and respawn, imagine how that would be if you were to get, God forbid, hit by a car and then you just wake up the next day in your bed. I started to think about, one, how frightening and upsetting that would be. 2, how that would change you over time. If you take away the fear of death, would we lose sense of what humanity is and respect for life? Would we take greater risks? That's what we're dealing with here in season 2.
Mortality is something the whole world has been confronted with as the effects of the pandemic play out. During lockdowns, we were all trying to find ways to stay safe and keep busy, to push away our fear and boredom at the same time. Ken says the way that his audience reacted to his story during the pandemic surprised him, showed him what his characters really mean to people.
Because people have really bonded with the characters and enjoy listening to them and care enough about them, it was weird to see comments or get emails from fans of the show talking about how much they appreciated being able to laugh and listen during lockdown when people are really isolated, and being able to give them some stories and something to distract them and get them to laugh was something that wasn't really expected. But I think people found the relatability of the characters, and being able to see themselves with the characters or as the characters, comforting in a way.
Ken says another product of the pandemic is something that goes far beyond the story that he's telling in his podcast or even the story of the video game. He calls it Fallout for Hope. It's that community of Fallout gamers getting together to help others. And it started with helping specific people.
Someone in the Fallout community had a real life fire. He suffered major third-degree burns, was hospitalized. So we put together a GoFundMe that ended up getting donations from all over the world. Later on, we had someone else in the community that was pretty desperate financially. She's a paramedic, first responder. Here's someone who was putting her life on the line, going into homes in the middle of COVID, who was losing her car and having utilities turned off. We mobilized and helped her out. And the day that they were coming to repossess her car, we were able to stop that. And so with all of those things that we were able to do for a few people, I started to wonder what would happen if we mobilized an entire community for a single cause.
And that's how Fallout for Hope started to raise money for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital.
St. Jude was easy. We've donated to St. Jude's privately for years. I have massive respect for what the mission was from the very beginning, and what Danny Thomas's vision was for what this could be and what this could mean. It's also, I think, an easy yes for people to feel good about, because I don't care who you are, where you live, what you like, don't like, believe in. We're talking about sick children.
2020 was the first year Fallout for Hope had a campaign for St. Jude. Ken says there wasn't much planning on his part, and he thought he'd maybe get a few gamers to participate. They ended up with 364 gamers, all streaming on Twitch and accepting donations from all over the world. They raised $109,000 in a single week.
I want to make this a proper ongoing charity initiative that we do every year that brings together the Fallout community and brings everyone home for the holidays. Despite what other games they're playing, we all come back to Fallout for a few weeks in December and do some good in the process.
2021 is the second year Fallout for Hope is benefiting St. Jude, and it's going bigger. More streamers with a bigger dollar goal. And Ken's Twitch channel will act as a main stage. There's going to be 24-hour programming, including a take on a classic Christmas tale.
We're going to do a live in-game Fallout 76. We're building a stage to perform a stage production of A Christmas Carol on. This is going to be very strange. We're doing a play inside a video game. But I don't like doing anything small scale. So we're talking multiple camera people, multiple camera angles, zooms, close-ups, set changes, an audience. We're going to do it large scale. And also some of the Bethesda team are going to be taking part in that. Pete Hines, the Vice President of Global Marketing for Bethesda, will be back, not as the judge at this time, but he's going to be playing Jacob Marley. I think he's going to be hilarious in that.
You get that? A play performed by the characters of a podcast, put on inside a video game in front of a global audience. All of this started with a guy telling himself a story, wandering around an empty virtual world. He got to build that story out and create more characters and hear them brought to life. He got to find an audience. And now that audience is having this tangible effect on the lives of families whose children have cancer. I asked Ken about that. How can he reconcile that series of events?
I mean, I try not to think in those terms, partly because it can be paralyzing. And another thing, my grandmother always said, whatever you do in life, always stay humble and remember you're not better than anyone else. What makes Fallout for Hope work has less to do with me than it does the 364 streamers who know of and respect the show or me or the game for each other enough to put everything else aside and mobilize themselves, give up their time, mobilize their communities. It only works because that many people care about it, believe in it. In that regard, I think the podcast and the success of the podcast gave me the ability to have a platform to do something with in a way that benefits others and not myself, but also serves as a place for us to gather and mobilize for an event such as this.
Kenneth Vigue is the creator of the podcast Chad, a Fallout 76 story. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find out how to participate in Fallout for Hope online. Just go to the website falloutforhope.com. And if you're a Fallout player, look for Ken in the game. He says he doesn't get to play for fun as much as he used to. But when he does, sometimes he gets recognized. Another player will notice his name and come over to wave or say hi, or to hold up their hands to their chest in the shape of a heart. This story is a production of St. Jude Inspire. It was edited by Grace Korzekwa Evans. Special thanks to Amanda Hill. The executive editor of St. Jude Inspire is Louis Graham. You can find more stories about the patients, families, and supporters of St. Jude Children's Research Hospital online at stjude.org/inspire. Thanks for listening. I'm Geoffrey Redick.